Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from today. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining. We are excited today to talk about a very important topic in construction, as you all know, payment challenges and how to master lien management with confidence.
Yep. This situation of construction payments can be very complex, and lien waivers are a crucial role in that, protecting your business while ensuring a smooth payment process for the vendors. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the insights, the best practices, and some of the technology solutions that can help out with that workflow.
All right. So before we dive in, just a quick intro on Red Team, just in case any of you are joining us that aren't familiar, maybe some prospects here. We are a company that we say all the time is built by contractors for contractors. So we really truly do understand the unique challenges you face every day because we've been in your shoes and we've worked with companies just like yours.
Yeah, Red Team provides solutions specifically designed for construction professionals. Risk management is a huge part of running a successful business. Construction is no different. And in this case, lien waiver management is a key part of that. It's very critical, constantly being dealt with on that vendor level, everyday interactions. And the right lien management strategy helps ensure that you have compliance. It helps protect payments, and that's why we're here today. So, as far as what we're going to do, after a quick introduction, we're going to talk about some of these payment challenges in construction, making sure that there's a workflow where everything that needs to get properly taken care of gets handled, that people get paid on time. Then we'll talk about some of the specifics of the lien management aspect of that, some best practices, some processes for maintaining compliance and tools to do that. And As we go into that, we'll kind of discuss some of these tools generally, both for lien management specifically and generally how technology can help with managing your payment workflow. And then finally, we'll have some insights, some little tips and things to consider when you're thinking about lien management. Finally, we'll wrap up.
Perfect. Thanks, Lucas. All right. So, a little intro. I'm Jen Leacock. Joining me today is Lucas Stram. We're both members of Red Team's product team. So over the years, both of us have had many years working very closely with contractors and industry professionals, construction companies. So we've seen firsthand the pain points, specifically around lien management. Lucas has a lot of background in our, payment processes, and that's a big thing we're going to focus on today. And so we're going to be sharing, a little bit of what we've learned from contractors just like you, and how you can navigate some of these challenges more effectively. All right, so let's start with the basics. Why do payment challenges exist in construction?
So, construction payments, obviously, it's a pretty complex topic. You've got multiple stakeholders involved with it at different points. Everybody's got different requirements and different concerns, and that's a complicated situation to bring together. And some of the most common issues that are going to delay payments can be things like incorrectly submitted invoices. Maybe the vendor is missing details or invoiced for an incorrect amount or is missing proper documentation. And any of those different things can slow down approvals, requiring things to be kicked back and forth between the vendor and the GC. And That's a whole source of delay there. It could be disputes over progress completion itself. What work has actually been done and what is owed. And if there's disagreement over that, then that's another place payment can get held up. Failure to satisfy requirements for the contractor to safely pay. And this is a major factor that often gets overlooked. And it's this last part that we want to talk about a bit more in detail today. As a contractor, you have an obligation to ensure that compliance before issuing payments. And that means verifying all sorts of necessary conditions, such as validating that proper progress, making sure the proper retainage is being handled, validating insurance certificates, making sure that if the vendor or the materials provider or whatever doesn't have up to date insurance or up to date certificates, that you have to make sure you get those because issuing payments could expose you to liability. Additionally, signed lien waiver documents before making sure you send out payments. You want to ensure that you have appropriate conditional or unconditional lien waivers that are signed in it and in place Without these, there's a whole risk of double payment or future lien claims against the property. And this is a complicated area because depending on the nature of where you're doing business, you may have different venues that have different lien requirements and things like that. And it's important to make sure that you keep all that together. Obviously, for all of these different delays, contractors aren't going to necessarily withhold payment to cause frustration. This is all just in place to protect everyone involved. And without a structured process for handling all of these requirements and making sure things are kind of done in a repeatable and comprehensible fashion, then payments can get delayed. That can damage relationships between companies and people. It can slow down projects and cause heartache down the road. And so Red Team, we step in to give some structure to that, to give a place to manage, who your claimants are, what their role is. Are they a first tier subcontractor? Are they a second tier subcontractor, et cetera? What's their place in the scheme of things? It gives you a way to track that lien documentation that's associated with each of those.
Yep. And we're going to take a look at some of that, like how you might track that in just a little bit when we get into looking at some of the tools. But the key takeaway here, right, is that the vendors and subs you're working with, they want to get paid on time. If you can provide them with clear expectations and a streamlined way to submit their documents, like signing their waivers, making sure you can easily upload their insurance certificates, then you're going to reduce payment friction. You're going to keep the projects moving forward, running smooth. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about managing lien waivers, right? Managing liens properly isn't just about getting your documents signed, it's also about compliance, right? So lien laws are very strictly interpreted, meaning if you don't follow the exact statutory requirements, your waivers or claims may not hold up in court, right? And so a best practice is to fully comply with your state's laws. This is a huge thing, right? Um, we know that these vary by state, right? Some states like California, Texas, Florida have state statutory lien waiver forms that have to be used. Some states require allow custom waivers, right? You have a little bit more lax as far as how you can configure them. Something we'll look at is that we support different waivers in Red Team Flex, which we're going to talk about today. So just keep that in mind. You want to make sure you have the right waivers for your state. So if you don't have those waivers, they're non-compliant, then they could be invalid. So it's really important. You want to make sure that you've got the right forms. Legal language, right? Another important aspect. If you miss legal language, it can definitely cost you. If you're missing the key state mandated disclosures, then this could be ruled unenforceable if you've got a lien dispute. So these are big, things you want to make sure that you do. So some things you could do, right, are keeping state by state references, right? I know a lot of contractors who will do that. It's tough to keep those updated. There are software tools out there as well that will keep track of the latest state requirements. And so this is something you could do and then update those forms in Red Team Flex. If you're using it, make sure those forms are always up to date. It's also critical, right, to use the correct waiver type. Conditional waivers versus unconditional waivers. You're going to have different cases for when you're going to need to use these, and you can do both, right? In Red Team Flex, so we support having the different types of waivers, setting them up to supersede correctly, right? Those are all things you can do. Um, and making sure that you have the correct release language, right? So you're going to want to make sure Florida is a really good example of this we're familiar with, where you've got to be really, really clear on payment coverage and how that language is worded. And then, of course, documenting every lien waiver exchange, right? You want to keep a clear record of this. Now, I've seen this all over the place, right? Keeping it in folders, trying to keep track of paper and electronic waivers, DocuSign. There's many, many different versions out there that contractors come up with to try to keep a record of it. We're going to show you kind of one today inside of Flex that's going to let you do that pretty easily. But certainly there are other ways, all the way down to your simple spreadsheet. But it's important that if you're doing that, that you are just going to be keeping track of all of your important through dates, exposure amounts, things like that, and of course issuing the correct type of waiver. So the last thing really I kind of want to talk about here in the kind of mastering Lien waiver management is just also making sure that you understand how your lien waivers and your release forms interact with each other. So, a lot of times we have waivers that are going to supersede others, right? We know that a later waiver is going to override all of your prior ones. With the latest through date. And so you want to make sure, if you're tracking that again, this can be more difficult to track in a spreadsheet. We can show you ways that when those get updated, they're automatically tracking and superseding prior waivers. So these are all really important things. Tracking those sequences, making sure you've got all the documentation. These are all really critical aspects of mastering, how you're managing your lien waiver process, of course, in addition to issuing them. All right, so now let's get into some good stuff, right? We're going to talk a little bit about how we can actually use tools like Red Team Flex to streamline some of this lien management. So I'm going to get up my screen share here, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we can reduce some of those errors, and we're going to talk specifically about the invoice approval process and how liens are managed through there. Okay, so keep in mind that with Red Team Flex, you can manage the entire lien waiver process as part of the approval of the invoice from the vendor for payment. And so that's going to include automating the document generation for signatures, tracking compliance requirements like the insurance and credentials through that, and then of course issuing the lien waivers and claims for all tiers. You'll be able to do that from there. But before we, get into that, just very quickly, I'm going to show you, where in Flex you can manage today some of your lien law documentation. Now, I say lien law documentation because I don't mean just waivers, right? Within here, we have a place for tracking all of the claimants on a project. I am in a specific project looking at all my claimants, and I have the ability at any time to set those claimants up. We always recommend setting those up early, right? Often, that is going to be really, really critical. As soon as you get any kind of like NTO or prelim notice, you can go ahead and set up claimants that are on this project. You also have the ability, if you're issuing your commitments through Red Team, that the claimants get added automatically. So if I issue a subcontract, for example, they'll automatically get added to this list. But I can add additional claimants at any time, and as well today, I can add documents at any time. So I am able to go in here and start tracking, for any of my various claimants on this job, any of the documents I have set up. So all these forms are all available, something you can configure for your company, and then you can be tracking these today. So this is in the case where you're tracking a document that's already created, right? We are going to talk, of course, the big thing today is about how I can just generate those waivers and issue them. And when I do that, of course, they will be stored in here, right? So we're talking about that importance of document storage and making sure everything is stored in the right place. So in here for this project, I'm going to be able to see all of my latest waivers and different documents that have been uploaded here. Can open them from here and see the details, of course. But this is all something you could do today, even without generating the waivers through the invoice approval process. Of course, the invoice approval process and having that very structured workflow to make sure you're in compliance and everything is ready to go to issue payments is going to be the best way to do things, right? So that's what we want to get into now. Lucas is going to kind of walk us through that. I'm going to jump over to an invoice, and we'll just talk a little bit about the steps that you would go through to approve this, and we'll spend a little bit of extra time on the lien waivers part of it.
A lot of these lien tools, they're a lot in service of a bigger picture that we started with, ensuring vendors are paid in an organized fashion, that you have a workflow, a process for handling that. And so this all connects directly into vendor invoice approvals, the process that's associated with that, ensuring that lien waivers and other required documents, that all of that is in place before the payments are issued. So we can look a little bit at how that works in action. And when it comes to vendor invoices within Red Team, we're collecting the information that's associated with the various invoice, whether it's attachments and things like that, or checking that, again, the exact amounts that are being invoiced correctly for the work that's been done by the vendor. And here, when this gets routed into the approvals workflow, which is basically a configured workflow of various roles that would approve an invoice at various points. The person on any given step can have the ability to look through this, and they can approve or reject lines on an individual fashion. Like here you can see on the right side, you've got little thumbs up and thumbs down. So if it's something where generally the invoice is fine, but maybe one single line is something questionable, that one line can be marked and notated, for further discussion, to whether it's kicking it back to the vendor, or to, maybe the project accountant is just kicking it back down for a secondary review by the project manager. And all of this approvals workflow, these lines that are created based on the existing commitments, kind of creating a consistent process where, whatever commitments you have, exactly what's going to be invoiced and how that's going to be handled. That helps keep this to be a smooth workflow. And beyond just what work has been done, that gets into the various approvals, credentials, like we mentioned earlier, maybe various insurances, liability, whatever it might be, making sure that it is up to date. And if it's expired or about to expire, then that gives the project management team a chance to reach out and confirm with the vendor, to get whatever the updated version of that document is, so that we can make sure that they continue to be in compliance. And beyond handling this at that level, we've got the lien waiver aspect of things as well, making sure that we have the lien documents in place. And here you can see the various associated documents, based on the primary subcontractor and secondary tiers, if need be, if that's something that you need to track for a given project. From here, if the documents have already been received, you can see them here. You also have the option to request those documents.
Yeah, so I'll jump in there a little bit and just talk a bit about this workflow. So obviously, this is the big thing, right? That we've been kind of trying to get to, which is that from Red Team, as part of this flow, you now can issue these waivers from here, right? So the process is that you literally just through the approval workflow are going to get to this step, and here you're going to see that we already have listed all of your claimants, right? So these are all of the claimants that are linked to this particular commitment, this subcontract. And so in this case, we have our, first tier claimant, the sub that we're contracted with, and we also have some additional claimants, some subs that they're going to be working with, and maybe even some material suppliers as well, who have issued us notices. Like we got an NTO in this case and uploaded it, and we can see that notice date there as well. And so always then, anytime we've got invoices for this particular subcontractor, we're going to be able to see the status for them and all of those sub-tier claimants, right? And from here, this is of course the where we can generate the waivers. Now, you could see in this case, like I've already requested a couple from a couple of the main sub and from one of their sub-tier contractors. Just as an example, though, I can go in here, and when I request, what I'm able to do is select from any of the configured forms that I have set up for this particular venue. And by that, that's usually the state, right? So, in this case, if this project is being done in the state of Texas, it's going to show me the all my forms that I have set up for Texas, right? So, keeping the risk mitigated there, not issuing the wrong form, right? We'll always have the correct one, and then you'll just be able to select from anything you have set up. So we're going to have a process that's going to let us actually generate a waiver, fill in if needed some of the dates, if that's something that's required. These forms again are configurable, so you're going to have the ability to adjust these and kind of tailor them to what you need, right? But emailing it then is just as simple as sending it to the claimant that you have on file, all of that being managed from back inside of Flex in your manage lien law section, right? Where you can manage all of your various claimants and the documents there. And you can see it'll update automatically once I've requested those documents. And then what it's doing is sending an email for that vendor to sign it, right? They can then go ahead and sign this. We're going to take actually a quick look at that before we jump back over to Lucas finishing out the invoice approval. But very briefly here, I just want to share. But your vendors are going to get emails from you. They are going to have to open up the waivers from there, and there is the ability for them to then just go in and sign the document. But they will need to validate who they are, right? So in this case, this is a vendor who is already logged into Team Player, and so it's that we're using Team Player which is our way of connecting subcontractors with Red Team Flex. And those team players will either need to log in or sign up for an account. It doesn't cost them anything. We just need to verify who they are. So we need them to validate their email. We need to ensure that the person who's signing the document is who they say they are, and that's what they're going to do. In this case, I have somebody who's already logged in and can sign the document, but it would be as simple as them just validating their email. They'll get a code in their email and making sure that they are who they say they are to sign these. But once these are all signed, they're going to be updated automatically back in Flex, and then you're going to see those per invoice, right, as well as in your main manage for the entire project. An overview of seeing all of your lien documentation there. All right, Lucas, I will let you take it back and finish up, kind of just very briefly, our the rest of our approval process.
Yeah, it looks like we've got a question, so we can circle back on that in just a moment. Yeah, so bringing it back into that, greater context of that workflow for making sure vendor invoices are being approved and vendor payments are getting submitted. Once a given approver on any particular step, make sure that everything is in place. They've got their lien waivers locked in. They've got the appropriate credentials that are all up to date. The job amounts and the invoiced amounts and the retainage being held is all correct. All of that. This is where in this approval step here, they've got various tools for rating vendors, adding additional note to the approval step, whether it's something that someone is leaving a note before they pass it up to the next step, or leaving a note, before they reject it down to the previous step, or just rejecting and canceling, sending an email to the vendor, hey, there's something entirely wrong with the nature of this invoice, and we're going to need to work together to fix it, whatever that might be. These tools kind of are just giving you just various options to kind of manage that, move things back and forth. And in this case, since we're in here at the final step, we would have the option here to execute this disbursement authorization and put the final approval on it. And when we do that, if we are linked to an accounting integration, that would be the step where things are passed along to accounting for payment to be applied. So if you're connected to QuickBooks, that sends it through into QuickBooks with the updated due date, so that the invoice on the QuickBooks side can be paid, and that payment information can flow back into Red Team. Same for our other accounting integrations. And so that's going to kind of go back and forth with it.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, thank you, Lucas, for that overview. So, obviously, yeah, like he's saying, right, we tie this heavily into that vendor invoice approval flow. But again, just to kind of jump back and into the lien waivers, then you can, go back here. You can see, your statuses, open up these documents from here, see, the status of whether they've been signed, resend them if needed, and manage all of those things, from a project level, of course, as well as from that individual level. You also have the ability here, if you needed to just simply upload a document, right? I mentioned that a little bit earlier, but let's say if you did have it hand signed, you could simply override it and upload it here. So a lot of ways to manage it, but the idea is that we have it all in one place. And that it is tied, of course, to that payments approval process, right? So critical, just to make sure that we keep the risk low, that we get ensure compliance, and everybody gets paid properly. All right. I'm going to jump back over to the presentation. We did get a quick question, so I'll just answer that before we move on. And actually, it's perfect because the question is about the settings. If you are a current Flex customer, what settings need to be changed to make that action button that I just showed on the screen there in that lien waiver step, that action to go and request a waiver button usable. And that was something we're going to talk about in a slide here coming up. So there's a way, if you don't see that button today, then it's something that needs to be turned on for your company. And we'll talk a little bit about how you can get in touch with us to make sure you get that usable. All right. Okay. Moving on here in our presentation. Okay, so we're just going to kind of wrap that up with some, insights and tips, right? This is just to summarize, what we talked to you guys about, right? But, big one was know your state's lien waiver requirements. So can't harp on that enough. It's important to ensure all your critical documents, like your conditional, your unconditional waivers, your satisfaction of lien claim, your notices of non-payment, all of these documents are ready to execute online. that you have all the requirements, that you know what it is that you need in your language, legal language on those documents. And then setting up your claimants early, right? So as soon as you get a prelim notice, you get a notice to owner, something like that, set up that claimant. You can get them in there as soon as you have that information, load in the document. That's going to set that notice date and all of those other things. And so it's just, you set that up. That makes sure that moving forward, as you're invoicing your different vendors, nobody gets falls through the cracks, right? You see everybody that you need to make sure you get your documentation from. And then finally, of course, leveraging technology for compliance, right? Of course, we showed you a great tool using Flex. You can track those invoice approvals. You can make sure that all your required lien documentation is issued automatically as part of that workflow. So something that you may be here already using our approval workflow and just not using that small piece with the lien waivers, or maybe you're not using it at all. And so we would highly encourage you, if you aren't, to set that up. You'll want to get your approval, the actual approval workflow, how vendor invoices are routed around, set up. And if you're already doing that part and you're not, just wanting to add in some of the lien waiver stuff, then that's what we're gonna kind of get to next. Um, we'll have some information here for you.
Yeah, yeah. So here we've got a couple of QR codes that you can kind of scan, and it'll send you through to our website where you can kind of see a few different things. So the one on the left is going to be our lien waiver blog post for kind of how these tools work within Red Team, so you can kind of see how they operate and understand them a little better. The one on the right is actually for booking a meeting to find out more about our team player tool that ties into all of this. And again, that's the for people that aren't familiar with it, Team Player is our vendor interface, our vendor portal, where the vendor can see what their contract is, and their whatever change orders may be applied to them. They can apply invoices directly and without needing to submit them, via PDF or through the mail or dropping them off on your front desk. They can put them in straight through that app, and it'll go right into your Red Team Flex. And this gives you more information about activating that. And I can say definitely from personal experience, my father was a tile contractor, and that was always his single biggest complaint in the business was communicating to the higher ups, talking to people, making sure he was heard, and was able to see properly what his expectations were in terms of what his contract was and all of that. And that just gives them a tool to make that all more clear. And that's a critical part of the lien management. That team player tool is what allows people to use a lot of the tools that Jen showed you earlier.
Yeah, it's a great point Lucas is bringing up, right? We did not, get into even, of course, the ability for the subs and vendors to submit their own invoices. But if you're wanting to use lien waivers, of course, that's an awesome, additional part of that you'll get, right? A benefit that you get if you're going to add on this lien waivers, you'll be able to allow the subs to submit their invoices electronically. They can also they're going to be able to enter that progress against those schedule values items we saw in that approval workflow. So it's a great way to just make sure your invoices are right, and save time, right? You don't have to enter them in. So a great point. Yeah, so this is where you'll want to scan those codes, learn more about it, like get a meeting with us if you want to get those turned on. There's also, I think the link is in the meeting as well, was just posted. So you can just go ahead and grab it there, click on it there. And yeah, we'll have somebody get that set up with you, and you can find out more about getting that turned on and starting to use it right away. And that's it. We're at the end here. We are going to open it up for some questions. So if you would like to stick around, ask some questions, or hear some of the answers, then we'll do that. We have one so far in the queue. So feel free to add those in. All right, let's look at the question. Okay, so we did get, it's a good question. The question is here, does notating a second tier vendor on a daily field report add them to the claimant list? It's a great question. It does not today. And what's being referred to here, right, is that of course on a daily report, a progress report, superintendent or any user who's doing a daily could go ahead and add vendors on that list. Adding vendors to that list today does not add anybody as claimants. It's certainly a great suggestion. We can put that down, bring that back to the product team. Lucas and I can go ahead and note that for you. But today, the only way that a claimant gets automatically added to the claimant list is if you have your commitment, typically like a subcontract agreement, if your commitment is configured to require lien waivers from anyone you issue that commitment to, then that would be the way to do it. And if you are a Flex user today, and let's say you wanted to start doing that today, what you'll need to do is go to your configuration menu and you'll need to configure the commitments. Let's say if you have a single subcontract, just that one. If you've got different subcontract forms, you want to configure each of them. But when you go in there to configure those forms, you will see that there's an option for lien waivers called required lien waiver. And if you check that box, that's what will happen. Then every time that subcontract gets issued on a project, that vendor gets automatically added to your claimant list. But that's the only way today we have it. Great suggestion, though, for the future. Does the lien waiver have to be signed before an invoice can be approved? Really good question. So there is nothing that stops you from hitting execute. What the way we typically recommend managing this is that the execute, which is really the final approval of an invoice, you may have several different folks in your organization who hit that approve button, and that has it track them through your workflow of approvals to various people until it gets to that final approver. And that person typically holds that permission, that only option to execute. And so that's the person who's going to be doing that final check. And so it's the same for things like credentials. We saw that in the demonstration today, right? Was that flow where you can check their insurance certificates and any other credentials that you want, and then you can check the lien waiver status and all of that. It is not going to stop you, because we still want you to have that full ultimate control if you need to get that out the door. But what we would then typically recommend is just that you keep that execute permission pretty specific to whoever's going to be that person who's going to do that check, and make sure on those steps those things are correct. But also potential suggestion, a nice feature to have in the future we can note down, to potentially remind you at that execute moment, for example.
Yeah, yeah, and we do have something specifically like that for the credentials already, where the credentials, if they're not in place and they're out of date, it is a hard stop on being able to execute those, unless it's waived by someone who has that permission or capability.
This was a great summary of lien waivers. We really appreciated everybody's time joining us today. If you come up with other questions, that's another way we can help here. So this QR code, you can reach out, schedule a meeting. We can answer some more questions if you have them. This is something you can share this webinar with, other folks in your organization and see if they're interested as well, and then go ahead and get that meeting set up. But we'd love to help. So let us know how we can. But otherwise, thank you all for joining us today. We really, really appreciate your time. Have a great Wednesday and a great rest of your week, everybody.